This check can't be real, the teller snapped, her voice sharp as she shoved the paper back across the counter. The slap of it hitting the glass drew a few heads nearby. The man blinked, taken aback by the hostility. "Excuse me?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, as though he was trying not to escalate what was already spiraling. "You think I don't see scams walk in here every day?" she said louder, her eyes narrowing. "You're not fooling me with this nonsense." Words stung. He had been in this bank countless times, but today was different. Today he wasn't a valued client. He was already branded guilty. Around them, quiet murmurs began to rise. The man's fingers tightened on the edge of the counter, but his tone remained steady. "It's a legitimate check. Please just process the withdrawal." The teller leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Or maybe you'd like me to call security and let them handle your little story." The tension spread like wildfire, every syllable of her accusation carrying weight. The man glanced around, realizing the show wasn't just between them anymore. Eyes were turning and judgment was already forming. He exhaled slowly, forcing a polite tone. "All I'm asking is for what's rightfully mine. Could you please verify it properly?" Her lips pursed, her gaze slicing through him. "People, like you always have a story, don't they?" The words dripped with disdain, disguised as formality. The man felt his chest tighten but refused to flinch. "All I need is fairness, nothing more." "Fairness?" she scoffed. "Fairness would be protecting this bank from fraud. Don't waste my time." She crossed her arms, her eyes deliberately avoiding him. He could sense it now. The decision had been made long before he even opened his mouth. Her coldness wasn't about policy. It was about him. The frustration boiled beneath his skin, but he steadied himself. "Ma'am, you're treating me differently, and I think you know it." Her expression hardened, as if his words only confirmed her suspicions. Whispers began to ripple through the lobby. "Is he in trouble?" one voice muttered. "Something's going on," another answered. The man could feel the shift in the air. Security guards, once casual bystanders, now straightened and kept their eyes locked on him. Customers who had been scrolling on their phones or filling out slips now stared with quiet curiosity, some leaning to get a better view. Every glance carried the same silent verdict: guilty until proven otherwise. The man swallowed hard. He wasn't just facing the teller anymore. He was standing trial in front of strangers, and every second of silence made the weight heavier. "This is fraud," the teller suddenly declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through the entire bank. Heads turned instantly. The man froze, stunned at her audacity. "That's a serious accusation," he replied softly, yet firmly. "I'm protecting this bank," she said, her tone dripping with self-righteousness. "We can't just let anyone walk in here with fake documents and think they'll get away with it." "Fake?" His voice cracked slightly, more from disbelief than anger. "Everything I've given you is legitimate." But she wasn't listening. She wasn't meant to. Her words weren't for him. They were for the audience forming behind him. "If you think you can intimidate me into processing this check, you've got the wrong idea. I don't care who you pretend to be." The man's jaw clenched. She wasn't protecting the bank. She was protecting her prejudice. And the crowd seemed to buy into it, every whisper confirming his isolation. His shoulders sagged slightly as he lowered his gaze, not in defeat, but in quiet recognition of the injustice unfolding. The sting of humiliation pressed heavy against his chest, threatening to suffocate him. Every whispered comment pierced deeper. Maybe he doesn't belong here. Maybe he's trying to cheat the system. The man stood silently, absorbing the poison of their stares. To fight back too harshly would make him the angry black man. To stay quiet meant surrendering his dignity piece by piece. The teller leaned forward, her smirk growing wider. "See? Nothing to say now." He closed his eyes briefly, fighting to steady his breath. This wasn't about a check anymore. It was about survival. Surviving yet another public reminder of how quickly he could be reduced to nothing. And then, silence. A heavy, charged silence that blanketed the room. The man slowly lifted his head, hands steady as he reached for the sunglasses shielding his face. With deliberate calm, he removed them, his eyes locking onto hers. Gasps erupted like a wave crashing against stone. "That's him," someone whispered in disbelief. "No way! Is that really?" Another voice trailed off, stunned. The teller's smug expression faltered. The certainty in her eyes crumbled the moment recognition struck. For the first time all afternoon, the room wasn't watching him with suspicion. They were watching in shock. The teller's face drained of color, her confident posture collapsing into nervous stillness. She stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. You're... Customers erupted into murmurs. Phones came up, recording every angle. "That's Kanye West," one whispered, disbelief shaking their tone. The guards, once poised to intervene, now shifted awkwardly, unsure of their role. Kanye didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the silence she could no longer control. The teller's hands trembled as she tried to gather herself, but the damage was already irreversible. The room had seen everything: the arrogance, the condescension, the false accusations, and now they were seeing her unravel in real time. For Kanye, the humiliation hadn't disappeared, but the shift was undeniable. The balance of power was tilting, and everyone in the room felt it. "Quiet," Kanye muttered to himself as he poured coffee into a chipped mug. No assistants buzzing around, no cameras flashing, just silence filling the walls of his home. For once the morning belonged only to him. He leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, almost savoring the stillness. Fame usually drowned him in noise, managers, interviews, demands, but here, stripped of that glare, he was simply a man starting his day. Yet even in that solitude, a truth pressed on him. Peace never lasted long. Out there, beyond these walls, people didn't see Kanye the man. They saw skin first, assumptions second, and humanity last. He thought of the countless times strangers had cut conversations short, store clerks had eyed him longer than necessary, or drivers had clutched their bags tighter when he walked past. Money didn't erase suspicion. Recognition didn't dissolve bias. Racism clung like smoke, unseen but suffocating. Kanye exhaled, setting the cup down. The world treated him like a symbol, but never quite like an equal. Invisible walls rose wherever he went, and pretending they didn't exist only made the sting sharper. His mind wandered back to a dinner months ago. A waiter looked at him and asked, "Are you sure you can afford that bottle?" The laughter at the table had tried to smooth the sting, but the cut had already been made. Moments like that piled up brick by brick until trust felt like a fragile currency he could no longer spend. He rubbed his temples. It was exhausting, questioning whether kindness was genuine or if prejudice hid behind every smile. The weight of that uncertainty never left. That was why today had to be different. No entourage trailing behind, no handlers shielding him from reality. He glanced at his reflection. Plain hoodie, glasses, no chains, no spectacle. "Today, I'm just a man," he whispered. It wasn't a rebellion against fame. It was longing for normalcy. To walk into a place without whispers of celebrity, without the double edge of being both idolized and distrusted. If people saw him stripped of labels, maybe, just maybe, they'd treat him as he wanted to be seen. Not as a superstar, not as a threat. Just human. Keys jingled as he stepped outside. The air felt crisp, grounding. Each step toward the car carried a mix of resolve and unease. The drive was quiet, his mind replaying the risks. Prejudice had a way of turning simple errands into battles. Still, he pressed forward. Handling his own affairs was more than convenience. It was a statement to himself. He wouldn't always need someone else to buffer the sting of discrimination. The Southern bank's glass doors loomed ahead, ordinary yet symbolic. To anyone else, it was a routine stop. For him, it was another test of dignity. He pushed the door open, inhaling deeply, as if bracing for impact. Inside, the low hum of conversations and shuffling papers greeted him. For now, it was just another building, but he knew how quickly ordinary places could transform into stages of injustice. And with that thought, he stepped forward. "Good morning. How are you today?" The teller beamed at the man ahead of him, handing back his receipt with a cheerful nod. When it was his turn, the warmth vanished. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as if he'd carried trouble through the door. He set the withdrawal slip down gently. "I'd like to take this out of my account." She didn't touch the paper at first. Instead, her gaze swept him up and down, dissecting everything from his hoodie to the glasses, hiding his eyes. Her voice lost all kindness. She muttered, finally sliding the slip closer. "Let me take a look." The shift was unmistakable. What others received freely, civility, he was being denied. In its place, suspicion. A familiar reminder that racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sneers quietly through a look. She tapped the slip against the counter, tilting her head. "I'll need to see some identification." He handed her his driver's license without hesitation. She flipped it back and forth, studying it far longer than necessary. "Do you have something else?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. His tone stayed measured. "That's a government-issued ID. It should be enough." Her fingers drummed against the counter. "For withdrawals this large, I'll need more." It wasn't policy. He knew that. It was prejudice disguised as procedure. The check rested between them, legitimate yet doubted. Her expression carried a message louder than her words. "You don't belong here." The questions began, sharp and mocking. "Are you sure this is your account?" she asked, as if testing him. He nodded firmly. "Yes. My name is on it." "Maybe. You'd be more comfortable at the ATM," she said with a half-smile that cut deeper than outright insult. Each remark chipped away at his patience. He had faced discrimination in airports, stores, restaurants, but it never got easier. Nearby, customers shifted uneasily, noticing the contrast between her forced hospitality moments ago and the interrogation unfolding now. Whispers floated. "What's going on? Why is she treating him like that?" Her tone dripped with microaggressions, each one a reminder that prejudice doesn't always come with slurs. It often arrives wrapped in sarcasm. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself. "I'd just like to make the withdrawal, please," he repeated, his words steady. She rolled her eyes but didn't back down. "These amounts attract fraud. I'm just protecting the bank." Inside, frustration burned. He wanted to challenge her arrogance, to call it what it was, discrimination masquerading as duty. But he knew raising his voice would only confirm the stereotype she was waiting to pin on him. So he held his composure, dignity intact. Sometimes strength wasn't in striking back, but in refusing to break under pressure. The tension no longer belonged to just the two of them. Customers in line exchanged uneasy glances. A man whispered, "Why's she grilling him like that?" Woman pulled out her phone, her camera angled discreetly. Another nudged her friend, murmuring, "She didn't ask the last guy for all that." The air thickened, heavy with the unspoken knowledge that something unjust was taking shape. Discrimination wasn't hiding anymore. It was being staged in public view. The teller leaned in closer, a smug grin spreading across her face. "You can't fool me," she declared, her voice loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "I know. What's really going on here?" He exhaled, a tired sigh escaping before he could stop it. Trouble was no longer just looming, it had arrived. Every eye in the bank now rested on him, waiting to see how this would play out. The teller's voice cracked through the bank like glass shattering. "This man is a scammer," she shouted, slamming her palm on the counter. Heads whipped around instantly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The accusation carried a weight far heavier than the truth she ignored. He raised his hands slightly, calm but firm. "That's not true. I'm here for a legitimate withdrawal." But she leaned back in her chair, her eyes daring anyone to doubt her authority. "I've seen people like you before," she sneered. "Fake checks, stolen identities. You think you can fool us?" Her words weren't just directed at him. They were broadcast for the entire room. In a single breath, she painted him guilty without trial. The sting wasn't just the lie, but the way it instantly became believable to the crowd. Racism didn't need evidence. It only needed a voice loud enough to drown out his own. The murmur began softly, like ripples in water. "Did she just call him a scammer?" a man whispered. Phones lifted, cameras angled. The quiet business of deposits and withdrawals morphed into a stage where he was the unwilling lead. "Looks suspicious," someone muttered. Another nudged her friend. "Record it. This is about to go viral." He stood steady, but he could feel the heat of every gaze pressing into his skin. The teller had turned an ordinary moment into a public trial, and the audience was eager for drama. This wasn't just about banking anymore. It was about reputation, identity, and the casual cruelty of assumption. Prejudice didn't whisper in corners. It shouted from counters, pulling strangers into the chorus. Whispers grew sharper, less cautious. "Isn't that Kanye?" one man hissed, squinting. "No way. Why would he be here alone?" a woman scoffed. "That's just some guy pretending," another laughed. "Yeah. People fake being celebrities all the time." He clenched his jaw, hearing every word. Recognition flickered but was quickly dismissed. The truth twisted into ridicule. Fame had never shielded him from prejudice. It only shifted the form it took. The cruel irony was clear. When convenient, they dismissed his identity. When convenient, they weaponized it. Either way, his reality was denied. It wasn't just disbelief. It was the refusal to see him as a man with dignity, stripped instead into a caricature, a spectacle to mock and doubt. "Let me show you my ID," he said, sliding it forward across the counter. The teller didn't glance at it. She shoved it back. "I don't need to see that. I know fraud when I see it. That's my account number, my name. Everything matches." His voice was calm, deliberate, but she waved a dismissive hand. "I'm protecting the bank's reputation. We can't have people like you tarnishing it. People like you." The words hung heavier than the accusation itself. "I'm a customer," he replied, his tone low but resolute. "And you're refusing to acknowledge it." She folded her arms. "We're done here." The injustice wasn't just the denial of service. It was the refusal to even check. Evidence sat untouched, truth ignored. Her decision wasn't about policy. It was about prejudice, cloaked in the language of protection. And the crowd saw it unfold, some nodding in agreement, others shrinking with discomfort, but none speaking up. For the first time, his composure slipped. He lowered his eyes, his shoulders sinking beneath the invisible weight pressing down on him. This wasn't the glare of paparazzi or the criticism of critics. It was humiliation born from being reduced to a stereotype in front of strangers. The teller's words replayed in his head, each one cutting deeper. "Scammer, fraud, people like you." The shame wasn't in the lie, but in how quickly it was believed. His silence wasn't surrender. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting the same battle over and over, only to be dragged back to the starting line. Even as he tried to breathe evenly, his chest felt tight, every whisper in the room magnifying the isolation he already carried. The crowd leaned closer, their screens glowing. "Get a better angle," someone whispered, adjusting their camera. Laughter broke out from a corner. "This is gold. Can't wait to post it." No one stepped forward. No one said, "This is wrong." Humanity was absent, replaced with the hunger for content. He wasn't a man to them anymore. He was a headline in the making, another viral clip, where dignity could be sacrificed for views. The betrayal wasn't just in the teller's words, but in the silence of those who chose to watch instead of act. Two security guards approached, their movements deliberate, their presence heavy. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," one said flatly. "I haven't done anything wrong," he replied, his voice steady but weary. The teller smirked, folding her arms across her chest, satisfaction etched into her expression. "Finally," she muttered. The guards flanked him, their hands hovering near his arms as if expecting resistance. The crowd parted, murmurs filling the space where respect should have been. Each step toward the door felt like a sentence being carried out, not for a crime, but for the audacity of existing where suspicion followed him like a shadow. And as the doors opened, the world outside waited, unaware of the injustice that had just played out inside. "Wait," he said quietly, stopping just before the guards reached for his arm. He reached up and slid his sunglasses from his face. The air in the room shifted instantly. A ripple of gasps spread like electricity. Whispers broke the silence. "No way, is that—" The recognition grew louder, disbelief mixing with shame. For a moment, no one breathed. The teller blinked rapidly, her confidence faltering as eyes darted between him and her. The same crowd that moments ago had labeled him a fraud now stood frozen in collective shock. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to argue. Simply showing his face was enough to expose the truth the teller refused to acknowledge. The irony burned through the room. A man nearly thrown out as a criminal was, in fact, one of the most recognized artists in the world. And yet, none of that stopped racism from striking first. The silence broke in an eruption. "That's Kanye West!" someone shouted, fumbling for their phone. Within seconds, dozens of cameras pointed toward him, flashes of light and frantic recording filling the space. "Oh my God, they really thought he was scamming," another voice cried out. The absurdity of the situation was undeniable. The crowd that had quietly judged him moments earlier now stumbled over themselves in disbelief. But the shift wasn't comforting. It was infuriating. Recognition came only when fame forced their eyes open, not when dignity demanded respect. The teller shrank behind the counter, her earlier arrogance now drowned out by the chorus of voices calling out her mistake. The teller's cheeks drained of color, her lips trembling. She tried to speak, but no words formed. Her smug posture had vanished, replaced with panic. I didn't know," she stammered weakly. But excuses couldn't erase what everyone had just witnessed. The damage wasn't in her ignorance. It was in the assumption that had come so easily, the prejudice dressed up as professionalism. The same crowd that once nodded along with her accusations now stared at her with disgust, their phones capturing every flicker of fear that crossed her face. And standing on the other side of the counter, he didn't have to say a thing. Her collapse spoke louder than anything he could. From the back, a young black banker pushed through the sea of phones. His voice carried over the chaos. "This isn't right," he said firmly, moving to stand beside Kanye. "I saw the way you treated him. That's not how we do business here." The teller froze, her eyes wide as her own colleague openly challenged her. He turned to Kanye, lowering his voice. "Sir, I am so sorry. You should never have been treated like this." The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence belonged to a shift in loyalty. The allies' courage pierced through the noise, proving that not everyone was content to watch injustice play out without resistance. Dozens of cameras tilted, recording every second, the teller's panic. The young banker's defiance, Kanye's unshaken calm. It was a viral storm waiting to ignite, the perfect collision of racism exposed and power reclaimed. Social media would soon devour every angle of the footage, dissect every word, magnify every expression. What had begun as humiliation was transforming into undeniable evidence, and the audience was no longer just the customers inside the bank. It was millions waiting to judge what they would soon see. And through it all, he stood centered in the frame, not by choice but by the force of injustice dragging him there. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood tall, meeting the eyes of those around him with steady resolve. His silence carried more power than anger ever could. The crowd shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, realizing they had been complicit in the teller's cruelty. Every phone held high now doubled as proof of their hesitation to speak when it mattered most. The teller shrank further into herself, trembling beneath the weight of collective judgment. The young banker stood firm, a visible line drawn between right and wrong. And Kanye? He remained poised, his presence alone flipping the balance of power. It wasn't celebrity that gave him strength in that moment, it was the truth. The same. Truth denied minutes earlier now resonated with every witness in the room. The bank was silent, but the silence itself had become thunderous. "Enough!" A sharp voice cut through the tension as the bank manager stormed onto the floor. His eyes darted from the trembling teller to the phones recording from every corner. "You're finished," he barked, his voice echoing across the branch. "Hand over your badge. Effective immediately." The teller's mouth fell open, but no defense came. The judgment she thought she owned had turned on her, swift and undeniable. The crowd didn't cheer. They simply watched as justice caught up in real time. Kanye didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel in the downfall. He quietly approached the counter, his voice steady. "I'll take my withdrawal now," he said. Bills slid across the desk under shaking hands, but his composure remained intact. With every motion, he reclaimed the dignity she had tried to strip away. While the branch buzzed with chaos, he moved like a man who had carried heavier burdens before. By the time he stepped away, the footage had already escaped those walls. Clips raced across social media, hashtags climbing faster than anyone could track. Millions watched the same injustice unfold. Millions replayed the same humiliation, the same reversal, the same silence that had screamed louder than words. It was no longer just about one man in a bank. It was about the reflection of a system too many had recognized, too many had endured. At the door, he paused, turning just enough for the words to land where they needed. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice low but unshakable. "This is about how people who look like me are treated every day." The weight of his truth lingered in the air, heavier than any accusation that had come before. And with that, he stepped into the world outside, leaving silence that demanded reflection. So let me ask you, if you had been standing in that bank, watching it all unfold, what would you have done? Do you believe the teller's punishment was fair, or should consequences have gone even further? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear every perspective. And while you're here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so this conversation about everyday racism keeps growing. And stay tuned, because the next story dives into another shocking encounter that proves prejudice never hides for long. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.